I am so excited to announce that iDriveAClassic is now sponsored by Adrian Flux, one of the UK's leading classic car insurers. If you're looking for classic car insurance, I've popped a link to Adrian Flux in the description box below. Hi guys, it's Steph from iDriveAClassic, and today I'm back with this lovely lady Aggie. She's a Ford Escort Estate straight from the 1960s, and she's a bit of a film star too because she's been in all sorts of things, including a very recent episode of the Netflix series The Crown. Now, she's not like any other Ford Escort I've ever met before because guess what? She's not only an estate, which is super rare, she has been heavily modified. So I'm going to be showing you all that today, and hopefully I'll be able to do this amazing car some justice. So first of all, I'm going to take you for a walk around the outside and then I'm going to show you under the bonnet. Now, I've been hoping to get my hands on Aggie, this modified 1 Mark Escort, for as long as I've known Simon. Now, usually, as many of you point out, we don't do masses of modified stuff on iDriveAClassic, but that's kind of because I like to show you the car as it would have come off the production line or very close to it. But this car is incredible, so I had to show you it. Now, what makes this car better than any other Mark 1 Escort that I've been offered is not only is an estate car, which is super rare, it's also an ex-police estate car, which makes it even rarer, and to add to that as well, it's been modified, and I really enjoy the modifications on this because not only is it being modified and modified well, it's also been modified at home. So every single modification you see on this car is something that Simon did at home himself in his workshop, which for me makes this 10 times better than anything that you buy from somebody else, because if you've got all the money in the world, you could achieve whatever, but achieving something like this at home, in my opinion, is absolute genius. And that leads me on nicely to tell you that there are so many modifications on this car, I had to get Simon to list them all out for me. So, on this, we've got, and by the way, I've written this in the description, so if you want to go back and revisit, you can. So it's got an ex-rally car crossflow fitted with scatter cam. It's got lightened flywheel, AP racing clutch, a modified carb, a heavy-duty 4-speed box, Capri front struts with uprated springs and brakes, a Mexico rear axle, anti-tramp bars, Lotus steel wheels, Mustang front seats, Mexico dashboard, Skoda 120 console, a Mark II Escort glovebox, Lotus cortina steering wheel, the Vauxhall Carlton load bed cover, and twin 12-inch subs and a JPL amplifier. Now, Simon did admit there is probably more, but having owned this car for over 20 years, it's probably really hard to keep a track on everything that he's done. Now, many of you watching this will already, of course, know the history of the Escort, and in fact, it's one of Ford's most coveted classics. It was made from 1968 until the year 2000, but it is worth mentioning that there was a brief revival of the Escort name. So in 2014, in the Chinese market, the second generation Ford Focus was sold as the Ford Escort, but I believe now they are going back to being sold, of course, just as they are over here. Now, it's hardly surprising that the Escort is one of the most loved classics, because back in the day it was a big seller, and it sold over 4 million units in its lifespan across all the generations, and was frequently a bestseller during the 80s and 90s, which was a massive turnaround from some of the snobbish early Ford comments where people would go, oh, it's just a Dagenham dustbin. But, of course, where's Ford now and where are the other cars now? And although that's sad, it is worth pointing out that what Ford did, they did very well. And as well as that, you've got the popularity of the sex appeal of the car, because it isn't just all about, oh, my dad had one of those. The Mark 1 Escort was, of course, one of the most successful rally cars of its time, with notable wins including the 1970 London to Mexico World Cup Rally. So you could bring that magic home, because whilst you maybe couldn't do the race yourself, you could afford to bring that magic to your own driveway by buying the Mark 1 Escort. Now, it all began for the Escort back in 1967 in UK and Ireland, because that's when they started being sold. But it was officially debuted at the Brussels Motor Show in January '68. Now, it kind of came from a world where Ford had made good impact on the market share with the Ford Anglia, and they wanted to phase that out and bring in something more modern to take that passenger car space. And with that, they introduced the Mark 1 Escort. Now, it is also worth mentioning at this point that previously Ford had sold under Ford of England or Ireland or Germany. They essentially operated as separate divisions, which meant that despite all being owned by Ford, as in Ford, each country's output for Ford was working in silo, which meant that they had limited sales across different countries and they couldn't overlap in marketing. So with that, they decided to merge, and the new merger created Ford of Europe, which gave Ford much greater power to sell, market and sway influence. And the Escort was the first new model to be built and sold under the merger, and it was the perfect storm because it was an attractive, well-built passenger car, and it was affordable, and it was available en masse. And in fact, the new rear-wheel drive addition to the Ford lineup was such a big hit, it immediately started to take market share from the homegrown car industry. So it came up and it took market share and sales from BMCBL, Vauxhall and Roots Group, and within a couple of years it actually started to outsell the competitors, so it did really well. And so well, in fact, that by 1974 Ford had sold 2 million Escorts, which made it the most popular Ford outside of the US. And in Europe, where homegrown brand loyalty is much stronger than it is in the UK, Ford still made a big dent on the market share and mainly took sales from Opel and Volkswagen in Germany. And part of that was because the Escort gave the buyer some choice. You could choose from a 2 or 4 door saloon, the 3-door estate as we're testing here today, and a 2-door van. So whether you were buying it for your family or practicality or for business, there was an Escort for you. Now, nowadays, you would never see an estate car sold with 2 passenger doors, but in the 70s this wasn't unusual. And in fact, the AD016, the Allegro and the Range Rover were all available as 3-door models. And in fact, Ford didn't change this until the Mark III, which was then offered as an estate with both 3 and 5-door options, before settling on the 5-door model as standard from the Mark IV onwards. As mentioned, this is a rear-wheel drive car, and depending on the model you went for and how much cash you had to splash, you could get everything from the 1-litre crossflow up to the 2-litre Pinto. Gearbox was either 4-speed manual or 3-speed auto, and the suspension on this originally would have been the McPherson strut front end suspension and live axle mounted on leaf spring combo. Now, with this being such a rare and valuable car, this has been filmed very far away from where it is stored day to day. Ford Escorts remain and will continue to remain one of the most valuable classic everyday normal cars. So showing you this is a real treat because I don't always get to get my hands on such expensive cars. Now, before we take a closer look, I wanted to speak to Simon because he's owned this car for over 20 years. So let's get his thoughts.
Hi, this is my 1969 Mark 1 Escort Estate, affectionately known as Aggie. It's ex-police. I've had it for almost 20 years and it's a cracking old thing, really. I use it all the time, not scared to use it whether it's raining, snowing, whatever. If I want to drive it, I drive it. It's part of the family. It will never be for sale. I'm pretty well known with it around, and yeah, I just love the thing. I can talk in length about all my other cars. This one, I just don't know. It is just one of those things. It's just feels like part of the family. My daughter, loves it, and it will stay with her, you know, forever, hopefully.
Now, this is a Ford Escort Estate with a difference, because when you get in it, and if you've ever been in one of these before, you'll probably notice that the dashboard looks very different to what you were expecting. So there's quite a few changes on this, not only under the bonnet, but also inside as well. So number one is easy to talk about, it's the headlining. So the headlining when Simon bought this car was really raggedy and needed replacing. So he's taken the headlining out of a Mark II Estate and he's popped it into this, which is simple enough, but as I'll show you, there's some really decent modifications, and decent modifications done well, which is always such a big thing. And number one are these seats. So these seats that we're sitting on here today, they're out of a Ford Mustang, and they're really nice, actually, really comfortable. And it's really weird because I've never been in a standard Escort Estate. So for me today, this is my only experience. So if you've got an unmodified one that you want to get on the channel, get in touch, because it'd be nice to do a bit of a comparison. So over here we've got the glove box, as you'd expect, and that goes back quite far, almost to the engine bay, which not concerning whatsoever. And as we come over, we've got the fan and the heater controls, and we've got the wipers as well. So those wipers are single speed. Now, as we come down into the centre, this is where we start to see some of the changes. So this centre console has been taken out of a Skoda, I believe 120 LE, and it's been slightly modified there. So as we come down, you can see the CD player that's been put in as an aftermarket, and also this clock. Now, if you're a Ford fan, you might spot that that is out of a Mondeo. And as we come into the centre here, we've got our steering wheel, which you will spot is not the original. So this steering wheel is out of a Lotus Cortina. Really nice, actually. It doesn't feel really out of place, but I suppose everything else that we're looking at is quite modified. So now you'll probably notice behind here, we've got a different dash setup. This has come straight out of a Ford Mexico, and as you can see over here, somebody's engraved Escort into it. Well, that was Simon, and he did that over 20 years ago. And a quick look at some of the dials that we've got here. So of course we've got rev counter, coming over into speedo, and then just some of the standard dials that we'd expect, including temperature, oil, fuel, and of course you can just see if your battery's charging there. And I think something that's really nice when you take out cars like this that somebody's had for an awfully long time is you buy into the tapestry of somebody's life, because you can kind of feel that Simon's done bits to it and come back to it and done other bits. And sometimes that's just as special as testing a standard car. Now, although this isn't our standard box, I thought I'd show you as well. So we've got 4 forward gears and reverse as well. So to get that in, we go up into first, down into second, across and up into third, down into fourth. Now to get this into reverse, we just push it down and bring it down just like that. We've talked about all the exciting changes going on in here, but let's talk about what's going on under the bonnet, because we've got a 1600 crossflow engine under there, and it sounds absolutely nuts. Now, for us to start this up, we have to pump the pedal 3 times, and then we're going to turn the key. So I'm going to go quiet, because honestly, this is probably the sexiest engine that we've ever had on iDriveAClassic, and I want you guys to appreciate it so much. So of course, we're going to start it in here, then we're going to go to the back, and you can hear it from there too. Now let's check it out from the back too. So we're going to go up all the way into 4th gear, which is her top gear on this, so you can hear what she sounds like. So be prepared, because she's quite a feisty lady. I tell you what, I couldn't own this car, I'd be in trouble. I'd have a million points on my licence, because Aggie has got more get up and go than any other car that we have tested on iDriveAClassic. So of course we've got that 1.6 under the bonnet, and you can certainly tell that it's being messed about with, because this is one hell of a fast car. It's nice to drive, except for the suspension, which does feel a little bit hard, but quite often when you do take out these cars that people have really modified, that is one of the things that you can really tell. You know what else you can tell? That Simon was once into banger racing and likes to drive fast, because this car does not like to be driven appropriately. Weirdly, driving Aggie has come very naturally to me. Now, I've never driven a Ford Escort in my life, well, not one of this age anyway, and I don't know, it just feels such a natural driving position. And it's bizarre because some of these cars that you get into occasionally, you don't really feel like you're enjoying it because the whole time you almost feel like you're learning to re-drive. But with Aggie, I don't know, it's almost like I've driven her 1,000 times before, which is not only testament to this car in particular, but to Fords, because I think that I get in a lot of Fords of this era, and you do feel like the driving position, you feel like the driving experience just all comes very naturally to you, which for me is always the sign of a very good car. So what else is going on with Aggie? Because of course, everything has been kind of modified. In fact, there's very little on this car that hasn't been modified. And I've never driven a standard, so unfortunately I can't say to you it's better or it's worse, but I can tell you this is one of the most sprightly and exciting cars from the 60s that I've ever taken out on test, certainly the quickest. And I think that it's funny because from the outside, I mean, you notice that the wheels are different. I think they're Lotus wheels. When you look at Aggie straight on in a car park, you think it's a nice car, but you don't expect the experience that you get when you get behind the wheel. Now, another thing that I noticed when I was taking her around corners is that she's very responsive. So I've got nobody around me, so I can show you even just a little movement of that steering wheel there. We're getting a near positive response every single time, which is great because when you've got your foot down, you need everything to be as fast as that engine that's under the bonnet. Now again, as we just put our foot down, she's nice really. I mean, I'm usually such an anti-modification person, so to take out something that's been quite heavily modified and enjoy it doesn't feel like something that I thought was going to happen. I thought I was going to feel like it was just a bit too far-fetched for me, but it's all been done very tastefully. And I think as well, just because she looks so natural from the outside, those modifications that are hidden away and those modifications we've got inside don't feel like too much of an onslaught into something different. Now, I remember probably a year ago, I always said I wasn't really a classic Ford person. But in fact, the more I've taken out of the Ford range from the 50s, 60s and some of the 70s stuff, the more I've got into Ford. I think the only thing is now with older Fords is that not only, number one, are they at the top of every wish list for a car thief, is number two, the parts can be quite expensive and the initial purchase price of the car is expensive as well, which means that whilst these are absolutely beautiful cars to drive, and realistically I don't have many criticisms of this car, the only one is I'd like it to be a 5-door instead of a 3, is that they're just not available. There's just not a car really now that young people can buy into. So it almost feels like nowadays, so when I first started driving 2009, it kind of felt like Ford was still within the grasp of a younger driver. But nowadays, it just feels like it's a mark that many younger drivers just won't get to appreciate, especially of this era, which is a massive shame. Now I feel like I'm rambling away on camera, and that's largely because I don't want to give this car back. Now, quite often I do take cars out and I think at the end, oh God, that's not something I'd want to own for myself. But today, even with all the modifications, which would usually put me off, Aggie is definitely one of my star cars. She's up there with when I took Joe's Marina out and I ended up buying a Marina myself, and a couple of the other cars that I've taken out, the Hillman Minx, that was another one. This is probably in my top 5 favourite cars that I've taken out. So it comes as no surprise that Simon's had this car for over 20 years. And he actually said to me before I took it out for test today that if he got asked which of his cars would he never sell, he would say that Aggie was the car that had to stay. And do you know what, Simon? I can see exactly where you're coming from, because today's been really fun. I've taken you out, I've shown you around Aggie, I've shown you under the bonnet, and I've also put my foot down, which is not usually something I do on test, but I did check I could do it before I took her out today. So I really hope you've enjoyed this test drive. It's been an absolute pleasure taking you out. Aggie is a beautiful car. And remember, if you have watched The Crown and you haven't spotted her yet, go back to the episode where Prince Charles is in Wales and you might just spot her on the high street. Now, until next time, take care and drive safely.